Hello, everybody. Apologies for being a few minutes late. There always turns out to be something that I need to do that I forgot to do right before I start. Welcome to what I am told is the 100th episode of this show. Although okay, there's Zachariah. I am. I was worried for a minute that you couldn't see or hear me. We were back to the early days of technical difficulties. Last week was supposed to be the 100th episode of this show, but then we remembered that our eye exam was supposed to be like some weeks ago, and the eye doctor got sick and had to cancel. So she normally doesn't come in Tuesday, and we normally take effort to not make appointments for Mondays, but because she got sick and it was a makeup thing, it was Monday, and then we both completely forgot about it. I'm a night person, so I sleep in pretty late. And all of a sudden, my husband's there waking me up, and I'm like, "What's happening?" He's like, "Our eye doctor appointment is today." So the appointment was at 10:30, and I thought, well, maybe that's enough time for those dilation drops to wear off. And it wasn't. I sat down around the time I would start to prep, and I turned on the lamp, and I was like, "Oh no, that can't happen." The light was just... So I gave up. Although I suppose it would have been very amusing to watch me attempt to paint. Well, blinded and half dilated, because I think my eyes don't come back from the same time. Like the pupil of one was a different size than the pupil of the other. Those things just really seem to last a long time on me. It was interesting. I was looking it up because I'm like, okay, crossing my fingers, it's supposed to wear off before the show, which they said is usually 4 to 6 hours. But interestingly, people with light colored eyes, the effect lasts longer. Which I don't have light-colored eyes. I'm just unlucky, I guess. But there was a fun fact I learned. Well, after I got my eyes examined, we almost don't mind going to that office because that's like one of the few places we go anymore when we're among the youngest people in the room. Like, I think it's, and the reason we go there is because there's a doctor that's a retinal specialist, and my husband has like a retinopathy issue. And so I think they have a lot of older people because they do a ton of cataract surgeries and stuff there. But it's still nice to be young somewhere. All right, I'm gonna switch over. I think there are 100 is how old I feel, but also the vintage of this show. I'll take this away now. Maybe I'll leave this back there. I bet it will distract the camera, so we will take that away. So what am I going to do? Why is this sponge here? So I have described this system before. I don't think I've ever done it on camera before. I do want to very quickly, I gave this guy one coat of black paint before I started the show, but I want to just slap a second one on there. And Zachariah is also yelling at the eye doctor's office. I mean, I've been going to see an eye doctor since I was like 10. But I guess if you look at the overall population, the preponderance of patients are going to be less with the young. So I am brewing little baby cataracts, but very happily for me, every year she checks and she's like, "Oh no, it's still just stage 1. I'm like, yay. My prescription didn't even change very much, but I kind of want to get new glasses anyway. There's a new kind of lens for the progressive lenses. This is like the bifocals that don't look like bifocals, so you see at different distances in different parts of the glasses. And the lady who works in the glasses section, who I see quite frequently because she's like the only person I will let adjust my glasses, said that they came up with a new lens where you can see better, like up to the edges and stuff. But my lenses are also, not what you would call inexpensive because of stuff like that. I've never had that. You see these ads up at the glasses store, it's like, get 2 pairs for $99. This has never, ever once happened in my life. I've never once gotten 1 pair for $99. When you need the special lens so that it's not a Coke bottle lens and anti-glare and all that stuff, you don't get to have the $99 glasses, I guess. I think I'm just shy of seriously myopic, maybe part of the problem too, I don't know. I'm close to the amount where they don't recommend getting the LASIK surgery and stuff. I don't recommend watching how they do the LASIK surgery if you ever want to think about getting the LASIK surgery, because way back in the day, some news program had one of their reporters decided to get it, and she videoed it, and I was distressed to see some stuff happening with the eyeball. And I'm not like, I used to wear contacts. I'll stick my finger in my eye all day long. Well, not all day long. That wouldn't be fun. But I'm not one of these people who's like creeped out by touching your eye. But I am creeped out by the idea of slicing off a layer of your eye, doing some stuff, and then slapping that layer back on, and then you're not supposed to touch your eye for like a certain amount of time, or you could rub off the layer. I'm like, well, I don't trust myself not to do something dumb. So I'm gonna mix some paint while he dries, but this is Baron Black Tree. This one was from Bones, whatever the latest one, 6? 5? 5. It's from Bones 5. The latest one that fulfilled is what I mean. But he's on the website. This, I think, is Bones Black. On the website, you can get him in Bones USA, or you can get him in actual metal. So unless you were in Bones 5, you don't have him in this material, but the example I painted on the website is metal, and one of the reasons I chose this figure is because if you go in the crafts section on the website, there's in the drop down there's Dungeon Dwellers paint guides and information on how I painted this guy. I'm going to use the same colors. Is there, because so last week I was going to repaint or do a new version. I'm not literally repaint the same figure. One of the first figures I had painted, which I got a few while ago and prepped them up, and I'm still going to do that. But then a couple days ago I was thinking, like, is that cool for a 100th episode? Like, what's the most Rhonda Bender thing I could do for the 100th episode? And I decided that blending was the answer to that. There are even people who call me Bender the Blender. My way. So if you've watched before, you may occasionally have heard me say things like, well, if I was doing this on my own time, I would spend another 2 hours on this cloak. Today, we're going to spend, like, there's no way I'm getting this finished, but I'm going to paint it the way I would paint it if I were trying to do, like, a really nice job for Ron or something. Thank you, Reaper John, for putting a link to the Dungeon Dwellers paint guides. There are 12, I think, in there, all by different people. So you get different people's point of view, all on different figures. So I recommend taking a look at all of that, not just the one I did, by any stretch of the imagination. But one of the things I talked about, and that was how I painted the black cloak. And the base coat is solid black, which is what I used on the original, and a color that I like a lot. This is Dark Elf Shadow. So if you watch Anne's show, you may have seen this before. I do normally work with it in the other orientation, but to make it fit under the camera and in the space I have available, I did it this way. But unlike Anne, I'm not going to by default add water to the paints. It's going to depend on what the opacity is. I am going to add a little bit of water to that. And I'm hoping to not have to add drying retarder because it makes stuff on the miniature take longer. But my experience with paint is that whatever whatever speed you want it to dry, if you're like on stream or in a convention or something, is going to do the opposite. So if you want it to dry fast because it's like, let's just get these base coats on and get going, it'll dry slow. And if you want it to dry slow because it's like, I'd like to show you how I do wet blending, it'll dry fast. It's a magical property of paint. So that was Dark Elf Shadow. This is Dark Elf Skin. So this is just like very slightly purpley gray. And I find this a nice color for doing like a soft, rich looking black, I guess I would say. So this is way too big a jump for me at any rate. Can we zoom? All right, I'm gonna have to readjust this later, but we'll just zoom there for now. And also increase the brightness a bit. So this does not look as big of a jump on camera. This is part of my process, so I'm making you endure the part where I do this as well. Let's see if it looks more different on paper, on this camera. And still not quite as much as it does to my eye, but you can see a bigger difference there. And black and gray is one of those colors where it's harder to get it to look super smooth and you don't have any transition lines or little whatevers. So for sure I need at least one step between there. Because Anne's system is she would be adding a lot more water to these, but having fewer steps, and my system is more steps. And I'll talk about that again just kind of do general tips for blending. So when I am doing colors, like, you know, I pick a color to paint, I do guess at this part whether I'm using a wet palette or this palette. And occasionally I guess wrong and I'll start painting and it's got way too many, you know, it's way too streaky, or I've made steps I don't need, that the transitions aren't as harsh, chalky. Some colors are just worse than other colors to paint for that. Opacity of the paint has a lot to do with it. So you may notice also that I'm filling these kind of full, and that is because if it's fuller and because it's these smaller wells instead of the normal, like there's the circle palette that has, I think, 10 wells, or the flower palette ceramic ones you can buy. Those both have giant wells and the paint evaporates much more quickly. So the less surface area you can expose to the air, the less quickly it dries. Yes, it is on camera there. Yeah, it's still a bit of a jump, but there's the third way. Trashorama hates water too. I don't know if you mean in general or to drink or to put in your paint. It's a very broad statement. All right, and this is somewhere Dark Elf Highlight, which again is probably a bit of a jump, but I'll put it down on the palette and see. Oh yeah, that's way too much of a jump. Also, I want to check that I really do have that mixed because it came out very abruptly. Do I have one of my little metal mixing sticks handy? Pardon my armpit. Alright, I fear for my gray background thing, but let's see if I can do this and not make a giant disaster. Thank you for the subscription, Dr. Flock of Flame. 28 months. That's a lot of months. And we appreciate your support. So one of the reasons I'm doing it on this palette, and I know that this seems very counterintuitive, is this is a bit of a process. If I do it on a wet palette, I'm going to have to do that every time I paint, or close to, because if there's a way to keep paint on wet palette for more than 4 or 5 hours, where the consistency is exactly what I want, and is workable, I do not know that way. So I don't do that. If I want to do my very persnickety, this is amazing blend, or I'm painting something that's like a big surface area and I know it's going to take me multiple sessions to paint it, I use this because I can keep the paint longer in it. I know that seems mental, but this is the secret. So this one is actually there's not as much moisture in here as I would want. I want it that when I kind of squeeze like that, literal water is coming out. So I want to be able to just put it down and water's not inherently dripping out of it, but it's that wet. And then it's a reverse wet palette. So it's blocking the air from getting in, and it's keeping the air that is getting in more humid. And I have kept paint this way successfully more than a week. I will probably try to keep this paint until next week. Nope, I just messed up, which happens, a lot, because that is a darker color than what I need here. So I'm going to put it back in the paint bottle, because that was kind of a lot of paint. This is not a special brush. I mean, it's not a terrible brush, but it's not, I wouldn't do that with my very nicest brush. Do I rehydrate the sponge over the week? Sir Gambit asks. Absolutely. I check it at least once a day and rehydrate. And if it's very dry, or you lived somewhere that was very dry, I would probably try to check it twice a day. Am I always amazing about that? No. The last time I was doing this, which was a couple weeks ago, and it was pretty dry. This is a place that normally gets a substantial amount of rain. See, now I feel like I did that too much. Let's see. Oh, maybe not. And we have not been getting as much rain as we normally would. So we've had a lot of days that there are fire warnings and stuff, even. So you're not supposed to burn your leaves, or I don't think it's the really bad one, because the year when there was a fire up in the mountains, they were even don't drive on gravel roads because you might create sparks, or make sure your muffler's not hanging. There were all these things to try to not make any sparks ever. So that is the Dark Elf highlight, and then it is hard to read, but this is Vampiric Shadow 9274, and that is definitely a big jump. And I'm pretty sure I only use this a little bit in the very top highlights. But since there's no such thing as too much contrast, I mean there is, but very few people suffer that problem. I may make a couple of additional pools and see if we can make his cloak shinier. I don't know that it's ever ended up in any of the Reaper World books that have been published at the various ReaperCons and stuff. But this guy, you should ask Ron sometime on Reaper Live. He has the most tragic backstory. Ron was telling me the story. I'm like, well, now I'm too depressed to paint him. It's oh my gosh, this poor guy. So ask Ron about that sometime. So I am just kind of eyeballing this. The goal is to have gradations where, there's just a little step up in value on each pool. And now that I'm working with paints that I know have more white in them and are thus more opaque, I am more likely to add some water. That is the vampiric shadow. I brought the vampiric skin over just in case, but I really don't think that for a black cloak of this nature that we will need to go that bright, but we'll see. So I don't know what I'm up to here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I know I've done at least 11. And this is open because there is going to be darker shadow here. This is Baron Black Tree, which you can get off the web store in Bones USA or in metal. This version is actually, I believe, Bones Black from the Bones 5 Kickstarter. But that is the one that I had. See, that seems like too big a jump to me. And that isn't the highlight, that is the shadow. So we need just a little smidgy of this, I think. Zachariah asks, I wonder if both saran wrap and the lid in a fridge would slow down dehydration of the paint. Wrapping it probably would, but I wouldn't want to squeeze the sponges enough or that much. I mean, if I keep it in my eyes view, like if it's somewhere that I'll see it regularly, I will remember to check the sponges. I've never refrigerated paint. I do hear people doing it, and then sometimes I go on sites where people talk about paint and they say don't do it. Certainly freezing is bad for acrylic paint, and especially our paint, our thinner paint than the tube stuff. Like the tube ones, in theory, those can survive 1 or 2 freeze-thaw cycles, but the manufacturers do not recommend more than that. Ours, we recommend 0 freezing. So I certainly wouldn't put it in the freezer. I guess I'm going to just put this over too. Sometimes I will, if I'm working on like just shadows or just highlights, I'll have the sponge over like one side. I'll try to divide it up so it's like highlights on one side and shadows on the other so that it's not dehydrating even as I paint. So yes, this took like what, 10 minutes or something. So this is why I try to like save my time and not have to do it the whole time. But I've just accepted that this is part of my process now. Because I mean, you've seen me, even when I'm doing something that isn't super fancy, I will, let's see, I'm gonna move this back and, oh, sorry, I meant to actually do that this whole time. We'll do that and look at the color gradation. And then I won't use it yet, but I'll go ahead and put it in. I actually do often kind of do a shadow on black. Blue recedes, so to a degree we perceive blue, or like a really dark blue, as darker than black. So I put blue liner in the shadows, usually, of my black. But I am not at that stage. We'll put it there anyway, just so we've got the complete suite of paint. Babatuk has just shared the links to where you can buy this figure on the Reaper web store in both Bones USA and Bones Metal. And it is the Quindy now, and we need to be kind and not expect the same level of competence. So I won't throw out my bag. One day I wrote on my blog this, and then Quindy goes and finds it. All right, so black is a little... Zachariah uses these paint palettes at home, but only as much paint as I need for that day. I mean, I have used them like that too, and then I just don't bother with the sponges. I probably will... Where is this camera? So this is a size 1. I'll probably go with that. Let's see, get this back in position where you can see everything. Theory. Miniatures Den is rating with a party of 112. Welcome to Miniatures Den and friends. Wow, that's a lot of people. This is actually my 100th episode, so I'm painting the way that I paint when I'm trying to do something pretty high quality, which is slow and detailed. So I'm trying to do really good blends. This is probably going to be one of my less exciting shows. But stick around. We'll find out. I mean, we're going to learn. I'm going to share some tips about blending. Hey, Rogier. And black is a little bit different than, if I was just doing let's look at these colors. These are the holiday colors this year. If I was doing like this color or this color, because black is both the mid-tone and the highlight, or mid-tone and the shadow. So I'm really just putting in highlights where normally I would, be making some parts darker and some parts lighter. I have to leave enough black that it looks like something that's black. I'm going to decide that the light is coming from this direction. Am I? Yes. The ones up here, it would look nice from the other direction. So here I'm turning the brush to not, I'm not drawing a parallel line, because if this is broken up, your eye is less likely to see the transition point, because the transition point is kind of all wiggly instead of one big defined line. Now, if we look, it is totally very defined. So even though on camera it looks like there's practically no difference between these, in practice, there is a significant difference between these if you want to be insane. And that is really the secret sauce of my blending, is insanity. But there are other tips. So this is one. I've always said there are 3 factors you can control, that you can manipulate to control blending. But I feel like there's a 4th one, and now that maybe I've forgotten what the 4th one is, perhaps it will come to me as I paint. But one of them is the space of between your transition points. So the closer that space is, instead of trying to paint this as the, black, that's the mid-tone and that's the highlight, that's going to be Streak City. Like there's no way I can paint that and not see. Well, there is a way, but this is one way to control it. And this is my preferred way, is to have lots of steps. The way to do it with fewer steps is what Anne typically does, which is you make the paint more transparent. Usually by adding water, but you could add medium if you wanted. And, back in the day, I did both of those things. And then the third thing, I have to turn it so I can see the transitions sometimes too, is brush control. So being able to apply with a lighter hand where you want the paint to look more transparent, so where the transition line is, and maybe a little more pressure where you want to build up opacity more. And that's the part that takes, practice and work and stuff like that. But the first 2 things, there are people who do what they call juicing, and they're painting with like super transparent paint, and getting really, nice transitions. And there are probably occasions where I paint with more steps than this even. So you can you can get pretty far manipulating those 2 elements. The thing about black that is a little different than how I normally paint, and that does remind me of the other, number 4, actually. Sakurai, hilarious, because this is how I blend nightmare mode blending. Yes. Now, how I actually apply the paint differs a little, but that's this 4th thing that I'm going to talk a little bit about. And I'm very likely to do this with black in particular, and it is in that the Dungeon Dwellers Paint Guide does talk about this a little, and it has a couple of pictures, for example. So, as I understand it, when, Walt Disney Studios was making their classic, amazing animated films, you have like a head or main or key, I don't know what they actually call him, animator, who does the very important parts of the pose. So kind of like, if I was going like this or something, they do this part and that part. And then you have another guy who does the steps in between. So they have a starting point and an end point. They've just got to make it look smooth in between that gesture. And they call that betweening, if I am remembering everything correctly. And that is kind of the approach that I would take to painting black. But also, like, so this looks rough. And I might even, when people talk about blocking in, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Like, I'm not going to worry about blends. I'm going to worry about, okay, where do I want the light to be? What level of contrast do I want? I'm going to make sure that I establish those things, even though it looks like a train wreck. And then I'm going to come back with these other layers or thinning. I see a lot of people thin stuff down and use glazes for this part. And you work on smoothing out that transition line. So let's make sure we can all see that there's a terrible, terrible transition line there. And you just work on betweening it. You tween it until it's a smooth transition from that, one key area to the next key area. And maybe I gotta go down to my next color and just work that edge a little more. And this is where the brush control can come in, because if you can apply that very finely, with a very delicate hand, it helps. So that's a good way if you're very tentative with contrast and you want to push yourself to do it, or you find it difficult to think about, okay, where is the light and where am I trying to make the blends? And like, that's a lot of stuff at the same time. So breaking things up into discrete steps where it's like, okay, I'm just going to think about where the light should be. I'm not going to worry about what the paint looks like. And then, or I'm just going to, after I've done that, then I'm going to, make sure there's a high enough level of contrast. Then after all of that, I'm going to go back and I'm going to make everything pretty. So it's not always the way I paint. I mean, I will work up, like I was starting to do there, where I, go up each of these steps. But even then, the more willing, so factor number 4 is the more willing you are to accept a back and forth process, to go back in and go, oh, this isn't perfect, I need to fix it a little bit, the more you can push your painting. That I think is something that, the people who are getting amazing contest result miniatures, that is something that they're willing to do. You can't expect everything to turn out amazing looking just the first paint application, right out the gate. Like that. That's also a lot of pressure to put on yourself. But it can be challenging if you're a little bit of an impatient person to be like, okay, I'm not done. I gotta go back in. Go back in and do this some more. That is tedious. But, you put on some good music or a fun Netflix show, audiobook, all of that helps. Marika Reimer actually loves that part, the back and forth forever. And if you want to talk about smooth blends, she has a different way of doing this step, the roughing in. A very bizarre way that few people use. It's, I think in ceramics they call it toll painting, where you have multiple colors on the brush. So she'll have multiple colors and drag it down. So she gets like a rough blend kind of immediately by doing that. So it's not loaded brush or whatever people call that. I mean, it's kind of the same concept, but she's using more opaque paint, and she's establishing both the darker and the lighter color at the same time. It's hard to explain with the words. It's very much more of a visual thing. The first time I read an article, and this was back in the day when there were just articles. There were no videos. If you wanted to look up painting stuff on the internet, it was just articles. And I was like, I do not understand anything that was just said here. And then I had the opportunity to see her do it in person. I'm like, aha, the light bulb goes off. The other reason I tend to do a little bit of a back and forth on black is that very likely these are way too broad for highlights on black. And I'm losing my midtone, probably. So I usually kind of come back. I usually go up the scale and then come back down, shrinking everything and making the blends pretty when I paint black. So now I just kind of have to decide, like, how much contrast do I want? How shiny do I want this material to look? And I gave the barren black tree in the article a fairly, I mean, it was a soft shine. It wasn't like a, super extreme satin or something like that. But I did give it a little bit of a shine. And it's kind of funny because I painted the rest of him with a lot of weathering and stuff. And my rationale for this was that this was a magic cloak that he had found recently in his adventures. Like the one nice thing that ever happened to this poor guy. Because as I say, if Ron even remembers the tragic backstory, I don't know if he does. It was like he was in love with this noble lady, and her father said they couldn't get married, and then he went off and did something, and then she died, and I think his dad died, and like everybody died. It was just a very bad day for Baron Blacktree. And then he had to go in the dungeon for some reason. I think he was looking for some object that would remove a curse or something. I don't remember that part clearly. In person, it looks like more contrast than it does on the video, but you guys are watching a video, so I guess we'll pump up the contrast. And the challenge factor, because now I have to do the tweening on a lot. And this is the same basic principle I would apply to doing a color transition as well, like if you're trying to go from blue to red or something. Now, where I'm less likely to do this messy thing, so I'm very likely to do this block it in messier approach with black. I am less happy to do it with something where the paint is already fairly, like it's semi-transparent. So like red. Because fixing these mistakes in red would just take, you'd have to apply paint over and over and over and over and over again. And I know this because when I painted Zeba the Afridi, who I think painted pictures are on the web store, but I do not recall for sure. I was not rough like this. I actually started with an airbrush because, she's like that big. But I was doing I had test figures on the side that I was checking the airbrush layers on, and I felt like it was going to get streaky if I went above a certain point in the value of the red highlights. So I started doing it by brush, and I was trying to practice directional light vary exactly with that one. Like I had a reference photo, so I was trying to match cast shadows and the whole thing. So there were a couple places where I had to like correct shadows and stuff, and I soon learned that being a bit more careless and stuff just created a lot of work because it would take so much effort to cover over the parts that got too dark with the wonderfully semi-transparent red. I did it, but it took a hot minute, even though I had not been messy with my initial application. And how do we look now? The solid black is just a little bit shiny, which I kind of wanted. So this particular bottle of pure black that I have is pretty matte. Like it's very, I would say it's probably slightly more matte than a Reaper paint usually is. And I was painting some stuff recently that had a lot of black in it, and it just wasn't looking black enough. And I decided to, get this one out and put that on the areas I wanted to look darker. And I realized that this is one of the problems with matte paint. It does look lighter in value than a glossy paint. But then if you have too much shine in the shadows, you get actual light reflections, which can be especially annoying if you're trying to take photographs of things. So there's no winning, I think, is what I just said. I don't know. Yeah. Just if you're having problems with something black not looking black enough, try just adding a little bit of gloss, sealer, or medium to your black. And see, and there's the blue. So we're going to let that dry because wet, that's also why something looks darker when it's wet. It's essentially glossy. And then if you look at it after everything's dried, you're like, wait, where did all my awesome shadows go? And it doesn't look as shadowed because it's not as dark. And you can see that this blue liner is a little more matte, which in this case may or may not work as well as just having the darkness of the slightly glossier paint. So either I want to add a little bit of gloss sealer to my, I just use the sealers as medium, to my blue liner, and we'll see how that works. Because you can kind of see the difference on camera, but in person you can sort of see that it looks a little streaky, and I think it's because it's something more matte over something slightly glossy. But also I could be wrong. Wait, that is not the blue line. And it's possible one drop of sealer won't be enough, but we'll find out. We'll let that dry and find out. And I'll go back to mucking around with the quite terrible looking highlights. I mean, this is like almost physically painful to me. I think in the guide, I was looking at this just before I started. I think I said I added some of the vampiric shadow. So I don't think I went all the way up to that. I think I probably stopped somewhere around there. Now, if I was painting like black patent leather or something else super shiny, yeah, we're going all the way to white, and it's a horrible agony of back and forth blending forever. Really, I'm not entirely kidding when I say that the secret of my blending is insanity. And this is why I don't normally do this on the show, because you guys already, I'm sure, think that it takes me way too ridiculously long to paint a miniature. Like, only very occasionally do I finish one in one stream. This side is tricky because it should be a fairly abrupt transition between where there's some light and then where there is not. But on the upside, unless you're going like this, people really probably aren't able to see the blend exactly the way they can here, or on this kind of fold where it's very smooth. If you would like to practice your blending, I will recommend to you Bobby Jackson cloaks and robes and dresses, because he very much likes these, rolling folds, where the sharper folds, I should have kept one of those miniatures. There, if you have a sharper fold, you can get away with dry brushing or less fiddling. I was very pleased with, in Bones 5, I did a learn to paint kit, which, because it was a learn to paint kit, I was doing, dry brushing and washing on. And there were several Bob and Julie miniatures that had the kind of folds in the clothing that were much friendlier to those rougher techniques. See there, I'm remembering which one I'm on is definitely part of the process. That is tough. And really, normally, apologies for bumping the camera, I would normally hold it like this so that I'm moving, if I'm working with lighter paint, I'm moving the paint towards where I want things lighter. And then the reverse for shadows. Because where you touch the brush to the miniature, it's the most controlled amount of paint. It's a smaller amount of paint. And then due to fluid physics, I believe, as you pull the brush away, and this is microscopic, like we're not seeing it as a rule. You'd need a bigger brush and more fluid paint, I think. But it's leaving behind just a little bit more. So if you're pushing that or pulling that little more, pushing or pulling, in the direction that you want it. So if I'm using lighter paint and I'm pulling the paint towards where I want things to look lighter, I'm working with the fluid physics instead of against them. So yeah, I'm just looking for where there are lines and trying to make there not be lines. Basically. Were there other blending tips that I had? You really cannot expect it to be consistent by color. I know a lot of paint lines these days are trumpeting that they're very consistent. Maybe there's one out there that I haven't tried. But different pigments behave differently. So I wouldn't expect any, all of the paints in a paint line to behave consistently. I would never expect that now that I've studied up about pigments a little bit. Some of them are kind of transparent. Some of them are shinier. Some of them are matter. So like the shinier ones, to get our finish of paint, you have to add more of the stuff to it. The matte medium. And that's going to change a little bit how the paint looks. So I get why we all have the dream of super consistent paint that I can say, add this many drops to it and of water. And that's the correct consistency for doing this layering or doing glazing or whatever thing. I get the desire for that, but that's just not how it works. And I think that you will be a lot less frustrated and have a lot more success in your painting if you just accept that that's not how it works and use other methods. In this case, I think we're asking the wrong question. You're asking for the formula, like you want to know what X is. So you got A plus B equals X. X is the visual result that you want. You work with B. So A is the paint, B is the transparency, dilution, whatever you want to call it, whatever you're adding to make the paint less opaque. B is the variable. You work B until it looks like X is supposed to look. Now, you can't make a paint more opaque, is the problem. So some colors are kind of easier to blend in some ways, like red. The reason red is in the Learn to Paint kit about layering is because the highlights are semi-transparent, those colors, the red and the, I think it's Saffron Sunset is in there. Those are semi-transparent, they're easier to work with. You're more likely to get a win out of it, like I chose that very deliberately. Where this is grays with a lot of white, and our eyes are just more finely tuned to seeing transition problems in grayscale, I think. This is hard mode. I would not put this in a Learn to Paint kit. Well, the point of the kit was blending. I mean, if we're doing some like fur dry brushing or something, these are great colors for that. If you're working the dilution angle, one of these kinds of palettes is easier to work with than a wet palette. And that is why Anne is using that, because she's working the dilution angle for controlling the blending. The other day I was on YouTube and they recommended a video to me from a miniature painter I hadn't known before. But it was something like, is a wet palette holding you back? Or I think the topic was something like that. And I'm like, all right, you've intrigued me. I fall for the clickbait titles. I'm very easy to intrigue. I try to resist, but it's hard. And that was pretty much his argument, is that learning to control your dilutions really precisely for glazing versus layering versus wet blending versus whatever is an important skill for improving your painting. I mean, you know, if you're trying to paint to a high level. I think that was the kind of painting he was talking about. And I don't really disagree with him. Or at least that having more precise control over your dilution makes it easier to get, or less frustrating to get particular results. I mean, you all have, if you've been here before, you've seen that if I do glazes, I like test those suckers because every paint is different. So do I need 5 drops of water to 1 drop of paint? Do I need 17 drops of water to 1 drop of paint? I'm going to test before I put it on, because a glaze is like an end stage thing, and I would really very much not like to lose all the work that I did because I didn't dilute my glaze enough. So now I am working partly with the fact that my heat is on and it's drying things out, and partly I'm trying to increase the transparency just a little, or decrease the opacity just a little, for this in-between stage to work better. So I mean, the upper part of the fold is looking better, I think, but here is still a painful disaster. To do some back and forth with those ones. Oh, but let's review the blue liner part. I think it's maybe still a little too matte. Or the slight shine of solid black is a great answer for black shadows. I don't think this is so much shine that, well, it might be a little annoying to photograph. Depends on what kind of picture you're trying to take. Ron's always making me paint all these dark things, which is partly annoying because just dust. There's so much dust in my house. I did a lot of dusting and vacuuming and stuff yesterday. And then when I sat down today, I looked at my paintbrushes and I'm like, oh wow, there's like actually dust that was stirred up that's on my paintbrushes now that I had left out on the desk. Okay, that is like stuff in the paint. And you definitely don't want stuff in the paint because it's going to actually add textures. And that is, like, I wouldn't say this is a secret to blending, but it's certainly helpful. You want to do nice prep. If you're gonna put hours and hours and hours into painting something, you want to spend the time to prep that miniature so that the surface is as smooth as you can make it. Because if there's just like a little divot, like right there, there's like a very slight, you cannot see this on camera either. There's just like a very slight scratch line. It's barely perceptible. Or some, like there's a little, I'm not even sure if that's a divot in the paint or the surface of the miniature. You can kind of fix little things like that by you get something that's, usually you have to get something that's slightly lighter than what's around it, and then you put it where it looks darker because there's a shadow, and you can kind of plastic surgery the problem away. That is with very slight surface imperfections. You cannot use paint to make something look like it doesn't have a mold line or, a big scratch or whatever. Paint cannot do that. I suspect that was actually some of this dust that is flying around my house that got under there. And if I were being real persnickety, I would get, something sharper than this actually, and scratch it out and then take the time to fix the blend. But you can barely see that, and I'm not going to be that insane. The black base I am using is solid black, which I like a lot. I like Dragon Black too. It's imperceptible, but these are not just a pure black pigment. They're kind of a chromatic black. They're mixed from a few different colors. And I just find the chromatic blacks, so Dragon Black and Solid Black, are easier to work with and more interesting to look at than pure black. Now, some people like to go really chromatic black, where they're actually, they're going to take paints that they have on their palette and mix a really dark color that's not actually black, but it's going to function visually as black. And may do that, actually, I'm not sure. And I've always just been a rebel who actually uses black paint to paint black. That's just how I roll. So let's look at that blue liner bit. I feel like it does look a little darker than that one. But if you wanted to call that my imagination, it might be hard to argue with you. So often when I'm working on this line, I'm stippling. I'm doing little dot strokes more than, lines or long brush strokes. I'm trying to break it up. The whole deal with acrylic paints when you're painting layering is the paint isn't physically combining because we're applying wet paint or dry paint. We're fooling your eye into thinking that there's a smooth transition from this to this. And one of the ways you do that is breaking the line up. So here, this looks really bad because you can see exactly where the brush was. If I even take that, you know, too bright of a color. Let's see, I probably won't get to this fold, so we'll do it over here. So just changing the angle of the brush, you're still going to see a big transition, but it's not going to look as horrible as that one. Like it's already broken up a little. I mean, I realize it's very stark, but if you then go on and apply that principle with some additional paint, let's just even jump to that one. So it's already less terrible than this. Now, I actually should do this another time because you can see some of the underlying surface. So sometimes you have to do a couple coats of something with layering to build up the opacity where you want the opacity while maintaining the broken line and greater transparency where you're trying to make the blend. And then let's go, oh yeah, let's do this one. Coal Black is my favorite so far, but I also really like Dragon Black. Hey, Sir Make My Day. Great name. And Eat to Surf is here too. Welcome. This is my 100th episode, so I'm giving away the secrets to my blending, which is insanity. Insanity is the secret. So even though I haven't gone full insanity on this one compared to this, it already looks better just because I changed the direction of the brush. Eat to Surf says, I'm always giving away great advice. Thank you. Well, you're very welcome. Thank you for saying that. Sorry. I use these sponges also, when I rinse my brush out, I wipe them off on here. Or sometimes, I'm not one of these people who's very precise about the amount of paint I get on the brush. So instead, I just dip in with reckless abandon, and then I kind of get the excess off on my damp sponge. So the weird noise, if you heard a weird noise, is that I was squeezing the sponge out because after I've rinsed my brush a lot, it'll get a ton of water in it, and then I have to squeeze it out. Which the other thing that this benefits me, if I use paper towels, I go through a lot of paper towels. Like I'll hang them up to reuse them and dry them out, but it's just an insane amount of paper towels. And the damp sponge thing. Now this sponge is damp, so I don't really want that one dripping. That's why I wrung it out. This sponge, for those who came in a bit later, if I needed to work on this project over a series of days, I would still be using this palette, not a wet palette. And I'd have this sponge wetter than this. Like I want to, if I start squeezing it, have water drip out, but not have water drip out if it's just sitting there, because I'm going to put it over the paint and it's going to help keep the paint hydrated. And if I check that once a day or so, if I lived in a desert, I would probably check it more often than that. I've preserved paint this way for more than a week. But if I'm working like when I did this recently, I did have to add some of the, where is it? So this is drying retarder. This slows down how long it takes acrylic paint to dry. So the upside is it's staying the correct consistency here longer. And if you're wet blending, that's very handy. If you're doing this thing that I'm doing right now, it's a pain in the butt, because if I wanted to come back and I'm like, okay, I did, and then now I want to go back over, I have to make sure that that is dry. Like I have to check for reflections from damp paint and not touch it until it's dry for real. So I either have to be working multiple folds at a time or just be patient, because it's if you touch it while it's wet, then you start lifting paint up and you get those holes, and like, yeah, you can fix it, but it's a pain in the butt. And well, you probably could reach a point where you can't fix it, like where you've actually added texture to the miniature that you can't overcome very easily without taking some effort. Hey, you know what? I think I just like the shinier paint instead of the blue liner in this case. So I'm just going to go back over that with the actual black. Alright, so this part is almost not horrible. And depending on the size of the area and exactly how insane I want it to be, I might go down a size in brush when I'm really getting into the weeds on the trying to kill all the transitions. But I'm gonna like try to not be that insane today. I do check that the point is nice and pointy though. That's what I'm doing with my finger usually. You want to control how much paint is on your brush. That's why I do the thing with the sponge. But you also want to make sure that the point is nice and pointy if you're trying to do precise little dots. Sometimes it's a stroke, sometimes it's a dot, depending on what I need. Do you feel like it's slightly darker there than it's supposed to be? And that's fun because do I know exactly which value is the correct one? No, I do not. But if I get it wrong, then I just fix it. We don't need to stress ourselves. We stress ourselves out with this idea that we're just supposed to know everything and be perfect. And it's like, this is a physical activity. You can, sometimes the answer is experimentation. You try, and if it didn't work, you try something else instead of expecting that the answer to being good at this is just magically knowing everything all the time. I found letting go of that idea very helpful as well. This is not a activity where you can like memorize or study your way into everything goes great all the time. So watching videos is helpful, but there is no replacement for the butt in the chair aspect of things. That I hope is just water. So this I'm trying to shrink it down. So my light's coming from here. There's going to be just like a little bit going that direction. But this goes down way too far. I am now seeing, now that I've turned it, so this is part of the reason I turn it is for my hand to reach it better, but also for my eyes to see differently, because when I turn it to this angle, I can see the transition line right there. So that is something I'm going to have to work on. And again, do I know exactly what value is the one in between those? No, I do not. I'm either going to pick too light or too dark if I got it wrong, and then I just stop and go one direction or the other. And if I really got it wrong, I go like this and get it off before it dries. Hopefully it's staying in focus. So I did used to try to get this like perfect along the way instead of doing more of this in between thing. And I think the in-between thing is much less painful. So I like where the cloaks flare out at the bottom to have a lot of highlight. So I was widening that one, but we're gonna definitely have to take some of these other ones down in size. And that is the fun part about black. This black isn't too bad, but I have painted like patent leather, and it's a little painful. See, I got it too dark right there. A little triangle. So, I just get the lighter color until I fix it. I think you can see why I don't normally paint this way, because you're probably all asleep. So if you are falling asleep, just remember this video the next time you have insomnia, because once it rolls off of Twitch, you'll be able to watch it on Reaper's YouTube forever and cure your insomnia. Babatuk. I often have to remind myself my primary motivation for getting into mini painting was I can probably do a better and more ethical job than D&D minis painted in sweatshops. Yes, and I am showing you what I would do for, like, something I'm painting for the Reaper web store or a contest or something. I do not think this is the only way to paint. I do not think something that looks like that fantastic is the only goal to have while painting. We've explored dry brushing and washing and done all kinds of experiments on here. We've been playing a lot with textures for the past year on this show. I absolutely love that there's a range of goals and techniques and results in miniature painting. I think there's a lot about like army painting or painting a whole bunch of things or speed painting that is harder than this. This is just patience and then willingness to go back and forth and make it right. If you want to paint faster, knowing how to get things right the first time definitely helps. So kind of having more, having colors where you've done all the experimentation, you know what to do and what kind of contrast to use. There's a lot of tricks that you can use in speed painting to make things look better faster. There are a ton of skills involved in speed painting, some of which I do not have. So I have tremendous respect for people who can paint the same thing over and over again. I mean, it's been like 6 years since I painted this guy, so this is not like painful or anything. But people who can paint like 10 of the same guys at the same time, it's like that. I don't have that brand of patience. I'm noping right out of that. So I really respect people who can do things like that. I do want to paint some game miniatures. But it's for board games, so they'd be like all different guys instead of a bunch of the same pose. So I'm hoping to do that soon. I actually want to play around with, what is the generic name we're using for stuff like contrast paint? One coat paints. So I have the Reaper Super Washes, which I like. And I've got the Viejo Express, I think which I have not had a chance to play with much, but now they've come out with like an expansion set with some additional colors, so I'm kind of like, well, do I want to put off working on these guys until I have, the full range of color options? Because they're different factions, so I'm going to have to make some choices about, some color unification between them so that it visually helps you see who's on whose team. And what if I miss some amazing colors I could have done that with? I also have the little dragons from Flamecraft which are so cute. I just can't even, that I want to paint. And then there are new ones coming. They made a set of different poses for those. I'm just trying to establish if I think it looks good enough right there, and I can see a little smidge of a line. And the thing about the blocking in messy part that I did at the beginning is this stage, you can customize how much of this you're going to do to what the miniature is for. So if this were a gaming miniature, I could do more like this and call it good. Or I can keep going like I am now and say I want to enter this in the MSP Open next year. Which I probably already did enter this guy MSP Open one year, the year after I painted him, but I don't know for sure. Babatuk says the Army Painter Speed Paint 2.0 are quite good considering, which sounds like damning with faint praise, but that's very good for Army Painter. The reason I chose the Viejo ones is that aside from this deviation of I'm all about the slight gloss that Solid Black has, I really like my paint to be matte. This kind of thing, seeing the transition lines and stuff, is just much tougher for me if there's a lot of variation in the finish of the paint. And I'm just so used to working with super matte paint. Well, not super matte, because you can actually go super matte. There's some companies who are very, very matte, and that's probably more than I want. I guess I'm very Cinderella on the matte front. But when I saw that the Viejo version was like the Reaper Super Washes matte, I was like, okay, then that pretty much decides it for me. And I know I've seen in reviews that they're maybe a little less pigmented and they don't do the one coat thing as much, but I tend to shade down with them. So I'm okay if in fact, it works better if I could be building up my dark areas or more colorful areas slowly instead of ending up with something being way darker than I wanted, or, way more, whatever that I wanted it to be. Babatou says the Speed Paint 2.0 work well with the Grisaille undercoat. And I'm waffling on that because in my testing with the Reaper paints, you just cannot get a really saturated look with like a full zenithal. Because there's always, that black and gray is there desaturating things. So what I like about the shade down way is that I can get, if I want something to be a nice cheery red or green or whatever, I can get more of that. Now, does my way take longer? Yes, 100%. Am I going to try to find something in the middle? Yeah, probably. I'm thinking of base coating in gray and then doing a spray instead of full black. And then if I want shadows to be darker, I'll add that either myself as grisaille, more controlled grisaille, or I'll do it with, the color paint when I'm painting. But I'm going to work on the assumption that more things I'm going to want to have medium value than I'm going to want to have super dark value. So doing the full black to white prep method is going to sacrifice more vibrancy than I want to. Because when I'm not painting things for Ron that he tells me have to be colors like this, which is like everything. I don't know why he wants me to paint desaturated colors all the time. I'm like, why am I the desaturated person? I'm over here trying to paint things purple and teal all the time. So when I'm not painting things that Ron tells me must be desaturated, I like to paint with a little more color pop. Well, not even pop. I just like pretty colors. Babatuk refuses to say slap chop. I think it's great that it's opened up an easier, quicker way of painting for a lot of people. But I only think it's a problem if people believe that like that is an invention that never existed before, which I don't think the person who started using the term, or most of the other people that I've heard using it since then. So these are, let's go to the close-up cam. These are separating just a little, which again seems to be a pigment thing. Some colors do it, some colors don't. But when I see that happening in this situation, well, honestly, if I saw it happening on a wet palette, I'd fix it there too. But I like to go stir now and then. It also gives me a chance to check the consistency and make sure that I don't need to add a little water. Because, you know, they are sitting out. They are going to start evaporating. Like this one in particular, there's less paint in this well than there is in some of the others. So it is evaporating a little quicker. I won't lie, this method uses a bit of paint. Hey, Melancholy, I'm probably saying your name wrong. I apologize. And 90 Raiders, wow. Welcome. This show is Beyond the Kit. I write / paint the Learn to Paint kits for Reaper, and so that's what I called my show. And sometimes I talk about stuff that's like kind of related to those, and other times I do different things. Today I'm showing how I do very persnickety blending, because this is my 100th show, and probably the thing I am best known for, apart from writing the kits, is very persnickety blending. So I thought, instead of how I normally paint on the show, which is me saying, okay, if I was at home on my own time, I mean, I am at home, but if I was on my own time and people weren't watching that I was afraid are going to get super bored, I would do this for 2 more hours. So today I decided to do it for 2 hours. This is Baron Blacktree. This copy is Bones Black, because he was fulfilled from the Bones 5 Kickstarter, but you can get a copy in Bones USA or in metal from the Reaper website. Yeah, this is like a gray purple, and I like it for highlighting black. It gives it this kind of, I don't know, soft, rich look. Now, if this guy was like undead or a pauper or something like that, I would pick more of a warm gray instead of the purpley gray. But for this kind of cloth, I like it. Back to the Analog Kit has a cute little purple monster. And there's a shout out to Melancholy, so you can check out their streaming site if you'd like to. Sir Gambit, oh, I see I missed something earlier in the chat. Sir Gambit, Kara also complained about being asked to make everything desaturated during the class I took from her at RC. Yeah, Ron likes everything to be like gritty and stuff. So everybody's got a depressing backstory, and they're dressed in gritty clothes, I guess. So it's always a nice, refreshing thing when I get to paint somebody in a pretty dress or whatever. I'm like, yes, color. Or let's briefly talk about Christmas. So today is the first day of the 12 days of Reaper. So over on the Reaper website, I believe not the Australian hub, but the US and the UK hub, if you order from there, if you order $40 or equivalent or more, you can choose one of the 12 days of minis. This guy is actually not in the 12 days, because there's also, so 12 days goes from the 4th to the 15th. But every year, Reaper also has a set of figures that are only available during December, or the holiday season. And if you look in the chat, there's a link to the 12 Days of Reaper, where you can see all of the figures. I painted a fair number of the holiday figures, especially the 12 Days ones, but also a few that are just in the holiday section, which is, if you go on the Reaper main page, there's like a banner that says Holiday 2023 or something, and you go in there, and scroll, and there's a second page as well, and you will find additional miniatures that you can only buy at this time of year. And this guy is one of those. This is the Mistletoe Goblin that Julie Guthrie sculpted, and I painted him on stream, I think last year. It might have been the year before. I lose track of time. So somewhere there is a video of me painting these reds if you're interested. There's also a post on my blog, which is there. But it's not up yet because all that dusting I was telling you about earlier took way longer yesterday than I expected. But I'm working on a post where I do a roundup of all the holiday miniatures that I painted with links to any articles I've written where I share the colors or how I painted the freehand or all kinds of stuff like that. And some additional view angles that, that can only fit so much in the little graphic on the Reaper page. So hopefully I'll get that up tonight. So if you go there and hit the blog link, you should find that post either tonight or tomorrow with more pictures and information on the holiday miniatures. So I do get to paint brighter colors when Ron asked me to paint the holiday things. He sometimes has very strong feelings about, this dragon should be red or gold or green or whatever. So I always check with him on the Christmas miniatures to make sure that I'll be like, well, I already did like a red one and a green one and a gold one, so I want to try this color. But it's a lot of red and green, which one of the article on this guy, because there is a fully painted version of him, I was just doing the red, it says the exact colors I used, and it has some tips for painting red, which I know is not everyone's favorite color. But speaking of paint, there's a holiday paint set as well that's up on the site now in that holiday section. And these are the colors. So there's the spruce green, and it's nice that I can do this on video because you can see that angelic gold and sparkling snow are metallics and how they are all gleamy and shiny and stuff. So those are the colors. I did this a few years ago, and I think the end was those colors were new then. And this is coal black that someone was talking about earlier that I love as a shading color. That kind of teal black is a great color to mix in for a lot of different shadows. This is like one of my favorite colors of green too. And I was looking at this just the other day. I was thinking I'd kind of like to paint like a dark maroon. I'm like, oh, cranberry. Cranberry looks like what I want to paint. There is paint here. It's white paint on mostly white paper, so it's kind of hard to see, but there is paint. So what I do when I do these swatches is I apply like full strength out of the bottle at the top, and then I add water, which is kind of, because the paper's white, it's kind of like if you added a lighter color so you can see the undertone. So this is just going to look black straight out of the bottle, but once you add the water is when you see the magic on coal black. So I don't have any of the other holiday miniatures. I mean, they're all, the ones I painted are all at Reaper. Somewhere I have some of them in blister packs, which I may go try to dig up for next show. But we'll see. There's 3 new ones this year. There is a dreidel as Do You Just Do You? Oh, Do You Just Do You? Yeah, I'm really bad at acronyms. Has pointed out, so there's a dreidel golem. And that's in the store, not in the 12 days. So you don't have to buy anything to get a dreidel golem other than buying a dreidel golem. And then one of the 12 days miniatures is a winter fairy. So if you'd rather paint blue and just celebrate winter, she's a good one for that. I really like she has like a snowflake dress made out of like snowflakes, and it's really cool. I enjoyed painting that. That's texture too. You don't have to worry about like going nuts with freehand. That was sculpted for us, which it's hard to look up the holiday miniature. So I think it was Bob Rodolfi who sculpted that, but I know that sometimes Julie collaborates, and so I'm not sure if I'm remembering or misremembering whether it was Bob or Julie that did that one. And if they're watching and I got it wrong, I apologize. But she's fun. I do have a story for that one. So when I was painting that one, that Ron wanted blue. I wanted to make it purple, but Ron wanted blue. Babatuk has just shared a link to the Dreidel Golem in metal. Sir Gambit said Dwarf Krampus. That is one of the 3 new miniatures. So there are 3 new miniatures in the 12 days. One of them is the Dwarf Krampus. There's like a super adorable Mouseling Caroler. And then like goblin-y, what wood is he called? He's Holiday. He's fun. Hey Melancholy, I hope you enjoy your dinner. I have the dreidel somewhere, but I think it might be a victim of the disorganization that has occurred while attempting to find organization. So I don't know if I'll be able to find him, but I might try to finish up this guy this month. But I might also see if I can snag a Mouseling Caroler because so cute, I can't even. So I'm thinking it might be fun to try to snag him before next week. But I will try to see if I can find my box of stuff that I think the holiday miniatures are in, and I might be able to find like Joy and a couple of the other ones and show them on stream next week. If you haven't seen the Reaper miniatures before, the holiday miniatures, there are several dragons and cat dragons that are very fun, that are mischievously messing with presents and trees. And those were some of my favorite to paint. I mean, the gold dragon, painting it in non-metallic metal was kind of a tremendous pain in the butt. But all of the presents and his adorable little face, and then the end result I enjoyed. And there's a cat dragon that looks like so the ornament is in the scene. It's reaching out and grabbing an ornament, but like you infer the rest of the tree. And if you have a cat, you've probably experienced this scene in real life. I think Julie did such a good job capturing that just look of wonder that they get on their faces when they see something shiny like that they want to destroy. I kind of miss it. So one of our cats, Ella, the one who will sometimes come on stream and let me show her to you, she used to love the Christmas tree, and she would sit under there and she'd knock down some of the things overnight, and she'd just look at it. And she's old enough now that she's a bit whatever. She still likes to sleep under there. I think it's like, she's not one for going outside or whatever. I think that's like her version of nature. It's like, oh, this is a nice safe tree and my comfy pillow is here. And excellent. So she still likes to do that. But I kind of miss the chaos of when she would just go bananas on the tree. I mean, she would climb about halfway up. And then just sit there. I mean, she really wouldn't go nuts after that. And the majority of our Christmas decorations were selected with the idea that cats would be tossing them off of the tree. So they're mostly like plastic or stuffed animals or whatever. I did get some new ones. I should have brought them over because they're all... Hallmark suckered me in this year. They had Timber Chode. They had Timber Chode. I was so excited. and he's like blowing fire that lights up. Well, they actually have two timber chodes because they have like a cheap one where he doesn't even have the fire and he's much smaller. And then they got like the fancy magic ornament or whatever the heck they call that. And he's like blowing a clear plastic fire that lights up. But we got Data and Spot, and he recites Ode to Spot, which our other cat that I can't show on stream because he's too big for me to pick up is an orange cat. And he is a good boy and a pretty boy. What else did we get? There was something else. Nerdy. We kind of have nerd tree. Nerd is the theme of our Christmas tree. So it's covered in dragons and comic book characters. What we don't have is a cool tree topper. So you can get all these like amazing decorations for geeks now. But tree toppers are rarer things. I know there's a Yoda one, but I don't love it. If it was Baby Yoda, I'd probably do it. But okay, see that's still wet. That's why it looks darker, and that's also why I'm not touching it. You gotta always wait for that to go away when you're doing layering style painting. I bought like 5 decorations, and one of them is Grogu, where he's kind of animatronic even, though he's just a little decoration. Grogu in some presents. And then, like, I'd reached at a point at the cart where they're like, well, if you spend X, spend $20 more, you'll get $15 off. I'm like, well, all right, you suckered me in. We try to resist the Hallmark. They had Timber Show this year, and so they suckered me in. But they had a Friends one, so I got that. I feel like I'm still forgetting something. No, is that 5? I'm an artist, I don't do math. I do sometimes find this with blending that it's like these first couple of stages are the most critical. And then once you start getting up here, it's actually not as hard. Like you're going over a smaller area and it doesn't have to, I don't know. The transition lines don't seem to show up as much, but it's like these first few steps where I have to do the most fiddling. Green User says, in my mind, cats and dragons have similar attitudes about life. And I think that is why I love all your dragons and cat dragons, because I think that is a great way to approach it. But you've got just the emotion you get in them, like the Christmas Hugs dragon has opened a bunch of Christmas presents and they're hugging a little stuffed animal, and then there's all these other very cool, speaking of geeky things, there's all these very cool geeky presents kind of amassed around them, and just the glee in the hugging. And then there's another dragon, I think it's called Christmas Horror Dragon, and that's one of the ones this year. I'm trying to only talk about ones that are out this year. That's sitting on a pile of presents and then hugging and you can just see the possessive dragonness, and I love it. And then the glee on the destroying things, and I do miss the chaos. Do you ask, are cat dragons a usual creature? I think that there are only Christmas cat dragons. Is that right, Julie? I mean, I think we should suggest cat dragons for all the year because there is chaos all the year. Do you just do you kind of said something similar to that. Now I must see an illustration of a dragon knocking over a pedestal of a marble art piece. So, I mean, if you have cats and you know that cats like Christmas trees, you just plan for that. Like, I don't get tinsel anymore. I mean, tinsel, we always had tinsel when I was a kid, and I love tinsel, but it is not great for cats to eat. So I don't get tinsel anymore, alas. We got a new tree a couple of years ago, and the fact that the lights are like built in and you can I mean, this even has, it can switch between color lights and white light, and it can go in different patterns and stuff. It's like kind of magical. We had looked the year before or the year before that, like we weren't ready to get a tree, but we were kind of looking, and they had one that it even like played Christmas music and stuff, and I might have gone for that if that had still been available. But I was picking out one that had pretty realistic branches. That was the correct size. That's the trick. We don't have a big area to put the tree in, so we don't need like a straight up slim tree, but there was a diameter that it needed to be under, and the one I really liked, it had just like super cool looking branches. I don't remember what kind of pine it was, but it was too wide, and I was like, well, alas, we'll go with this other one. But they've really made some strides on, they put different textures in, and it looks less goofy and fake. I'm not a huge Christmas, but this is the secret of Reaper Christmas is that the least Christmassy people work the most on the Christmas stuff. Do not ask me why, right, Julie? Like what? Why is that the system? But it is. Your humbugs and your Grinches are bringing you your Reaper Christmas minis. I mean, I like Christmas. My problem is that I'm ready for Christmas like around January 3rd. That's when I start getting into spirit and stuff. It's like, possibly I'm too late. Because like, I have an advent calendar this year that I just remembered, today. So I'm very caught up on my advent calendar, which is like a puzzle game. So like every day you do. I had one last year that I remembered slightly better. Then I stopped remembering to do it, so I had a different problem with that one. I'll say this, we did always eat the chocolate one. So I've been trying to get ones that aren't chocolate because, we don't need chocolate. And we don't really need tchotchkes. Like, I know there's some cool Lego ones and dice ones and stuff. But it's like, I buy enough random stuff without finding ways to buy more stuff through an advent calendar. So I was trying to avoid that. I did a tea calendar one year. That was alright. I mean, I didn't love like every flavor. I got to try some cool new stuff. And I think that year I got my husband a beef jerky calendar, which was not cheap, but it definitely had some interesting things. I think our favorite was it was like a root beer soaked beef jerky, which sounds weird, but it was quite tasty. But I do like that there's a lot more options now than just looking at pictures or eating chocolates, which was the choice when I was a kid. Oh, I got a cheese advent calendar one year. Grey Monster does the David's tea. Yeah, the year I did the tea, it was the David's tea one. But it looks like there are tons of companies that do tea ones now. I think it's Aldi's that does the cheese. Our local cheese store did one, but it was like $125. And I'm like, well, as much as I like cheese and advent calendars, no. It is in the very bougie, shishi part of town. In case you were wondering from the insane price tag. I'm concerned that my brush is losing its point a little. It's not, like it's still pointy, but it doesn't want to go back to the point with the alacrity that I would expect. Which doesn't mean it has years of use it can do for other things. Just this thing. This particular activity, it's going to be less good at. I'll switch to my 0. And that will probably help. I've actually gotten further than I expected to, which probably means that I'm just not seeing all the horror. I wear slightly less magnification when I do the stream because it helps me keep it at the correct distance for the camera. This particular magnification, if I put my arm in a certain place, the camera and I can usually both focus. But I bump it up just a notch when I'm not painting on camera because I am old and my eyes don't work like they used to. Well, okay, if I take my glasses off, everything's going to be magnified, but then I'm not going to see this part. So I got to choose one way or the other. Babatuk is sharing the link to Baron Blacktree, and let's look at his front because he's got a lot of cool stuff going on the front, and I enjoyed painting like the leather all textury and dings and dents on the armor and stuff. But for the blending exercise, I just need the back of the cloak. So we have not been looking at the coolness that is the rest of Baron Blacktree. And one of the reasons I picked this miniature is that there's a guide on the Reaper website. So you go to there's a craft section, and then in there's a Dungeon Dwellers, like Dungeon Dwellers guides to painting, and there are like 12 or so figures or sets of figures because I think there's multiple goblins and stuff. Reaper Miniatures has just posted a link to the painting guides. And you can look at PDFs from a number of different painters on how they painted their figures, but I painted this one and did the PDF for it. So I'm using the exact same colors. So if you want to reference that or look at pictures of, like, I think I have a picture where I kind of have, it looks like this, and I talk about how I got from there to there. And some other stuff about the figure. It's not just about the cloak, but for the purpose of blending, I thought I wanted something with those rounded folds because those are the toughest to blend. Thank you, Bobby Jackson. And if you were here earlier, I was talking about how I used red for the figure on the Learn to Paint Layer Up class because it's a little easier since red and the orange that you highlight it with are semi-transparent. You're less likely to get those lines, and you're gonna get a win and be happy. Grey Mouser is asking whether it's the metal one in the PDF. Yes, Bones USA did not exist at the time that the PDF was written, so that absolutely was painted on a metal figure, which you can still buy the metal. So Baron Blacktree, there's a link right now. That one is Bones USA, but if you just type Baron, Baran, you should get a link to both the metal and the Bones USA one. And then this is actually Bones Black that you cannot buy anymore. Which, I mean, I like Bones USA a lot. I had this guy from the Bones 5 fulfillment, and I had been waffling about what figure to do. So last week, if I'd actually made it last week instead of having to call off because I'd had my eyes dilated and could not see well enough to paint, I was going to do something else. And then this weekend I was sitting around thinking, well, what would be like the most me thing I could do for the 100th episode? So this is the 100th episode. And I felt like, everybody's making a deal about it, so I felt like I had to do something. And I thought, well, talking about blending and showing you how I do it when I'm being crazy would probably qualify as the most me thing to do. And then I picked out a figure I was going to do it with, which was the Frost Giant Queen. I think that's what she's called, Frost Giant Queen. And she's really, she's got these like very rolling, huge folds on the cloak. So if you want to practice, that's absolutely a great miniature to practice with. But then I was like, it's a lot of real estate, and I don't know, how far I can get. And I was like, oh, Baron would be good, because I was looking through some figures, looking for these Bobby Jackson torture cloaks. And I saw this guy, and I'm like, oh, he'd be good, because that guy is there. So there's like reference material to go with it and everything. But what I was saying about, so I chose the colors in the layer up kit to make your life easier. But Anirian, the elf wizard, Anirian elf wizard, I think is his name. And he's probably available in more than one material as well. He is a great figure if you want to practice blending or you want to test some colors. The rolling folds on his cloak are excellent challenge factor. Type folds. So when I started practicing wet blending and some other stuff, I broke out some copies of Anirian to practice. Grey Mouser says Baron seems familiar, and did not get Bones 5. When Dungeon Dwellers first came out as a line, I think he was one of the first miniatures, I believe. Like what we came out as a line. He was one of the first ones that they did the guide thing with. I think he was like the second or third one. Sometimes it's better to get Bobby Jackson's miniatures not in metal, because they can be so thick. This guy isn't, but some of the wizards and things where it's like the cloak and the robe and everything, that the surface can get a little pebbly because it takes a little longer for the mold to fill. I mean, it's easy to fix, and it'll happen on stuff like this, and then you just get your sealer. I usually use the matte sealer for that. So the one that's called brush on sealer, you just brush it over and it takes away small surface imperfections. I should have mentioned that before when we were talking about prepping. Yes, blending on plastic, as long as there's not like a mold line or something running through that section, it's pretty nice. It usually has like a really nice smooth surface, especially the resin type plastic like Bones USA. You'll get a really nice smooth surface, and you cannot blend around mold lines and divots and stuff. If you banged your guys up and whatnot, you need to take a little bit of time and prep the surface. Like, you can use that stuff. That's a real quick easy way to fix surface problems. I think it's better than like, people used to make a slurry out of like milliput and water and kind of brush that over, and then you have to sand it and stuff, and it's like that's a lot. Just painting on brush on sealer. The only problem with painting on sealer is that it's clear, so you can still see the problem sometimes, and you can't always know whether you got it or not. But you put a coat of paint over and see how that looks, and then you just apply more sealer if you need to. Because that's the other nice thing about it, is it's an easy fix to apply. Like, even if I just notice a problem now, I could still file down that section and apply, and not worry about, well, I primed this, so I can't fix it. I will fix stuff even if I primed it. But the sealer is something you can even paint over the paint. So like, if I was concerned about that little bump, I could try painting sealer around it until I eliminated the bump. And have I been that crazy? 100% I've been that crazy. More often with a divot than a bump. A bump I'll try to scratch off or file off. But if there's a little divot, you get the brush on sealer. Here, I'm just going to do it with water. So you want your nice pointy brush like this, because you're trying to get where is there anything that looks like a divot here? We're just going to pretend. And you're trying to get the brush in the middle so that that little pool of fluid is going to spread out to the edge of that divot. And you might have to do it a couple of times, but eventually you can get it, depending on how deep the divot is. It might only take 1 or 2 times. If it's a deeper problem, it might take a few more applications. But you can get the surface completely smooth. Which, like, you don't always have to go that crazy. It's just sometimes you'll get a little imperfection just in the exact right spot that it makes like a line or a mark or something you can see in the blend. And fixing the underlying surface problem is a better answer than just trying to throw a bunch of paint at it. This one's not like 100% perfect, but it's almost there. Because what time is it? This is more of this than I expected to finish. I thought, because I'm so slow, then I would not even get this far. But as I say, if you've got music on or something you like to watch, you can kind of get a little zen with this. And it's not as torturous as it might seem like it is. Grey Mouser painted Rictus recently, which is another one of the Dungeon Dwellers figures that has... Does it have a guide? It doesn't have a guide. Does it? Oh, it does, because he found the PDF but didn't follow it. Is that the Jester guy? No. I'm thinking of something else. But yes, definitely check that out because there are guides from a variety of different people who paint different ways. So that's a nice way to get painting wisdom from different approaches and styles. All right, well, I think I'm going to call it on those 2 blends. It's not 100% perfect here either. But there's always just a point where you decide that it's as good as it's going to need to be. For whatever purpose you're doing. Which maybe this is as good as it needs to be. For, when I start painting my game miniatures, it's going to be a lot more like that than like that. But let me take off my wonderful head thing and turn off this glary light. And say thank you all for coming, not just today, but for, 99 previous episodes. I know you all weren't here for every one, but any one that you've attended, I appreciate that you come and keep me company and listen to me yammer on about stuff. I'll try to show a little more of the Christmas miniatures next week if I can find them. Holiday, they're not all Christmas. Somewhere I have the Dreidel Golem. But if you want to see them sooner, tonight or tomorrow night, I hope to have a blog post up there. And I'll have pictures, different view angles, and links to articles with information and color schemes and stuff for the holiday miniatures that I painted, which is a surprisingly large percentage of the holiday miniatures. But I think I'm going to wrap up for today. And thank you, Turjan. Grey Mouser says it was very nice to see me blending. Are you sure that wasn't like just the most boring episode of this show that has ever happened? You all have a great insomnia cure now, though. But no, sincerely, I really appreciate that you, whether this is your first time or you've been here a bunch of times before, I appreciate you taking the time to come and stop and check it out and hang out with me. I think Babatuk is our acting Quindy. Can you send us on a raid, Babatuk? Is that something you can do? Thanks, Jen D and Sir Game at 25. Babatuk cannot send us on a raid. So, but Reaper John is still here. So he's going to find somebody cool for us to raid. Studio J7. So say hi, spread the Reaper love, and I'll see you next week for something festive, probably. Bye, everybody.